If you are new to the Bazaar, then this is absolutely a build I can recommend. It is probably the easiest to pilot Pygmalien build. It is doing absolute crazy numbers. Let's jump into the build.
You should know, I'm a bit of a legend on Pelago.
So here we have our Pygmalien build. So this is just one example of a run. The build is effectively a medium item crook build for Pygmalien. And it's pretty much as simple as that. So let me go over the single most key item for this build that is going to carry you to victory. And that is this item over here, this far right item, the crook. The crook, every 8 seconds, I believe, deals some amount of damage, but we don't care about that. Its passive is what's important. Your weapons have bonus damage for each medium item that you have. Now this starts off at a measly 10 at the lower ranks, but scales up to 50. Now, 50 bonus damage for each medium item might not sound crazy. That's 250 damage on each of your items, which is good, but surely there are better things out there, you know? Pygmalien can get Beasts of Burden or Regal Blades that are hitting for thousands and thousands of damage. So where does this effectiveness really lie? And the key to pulling off a crook build, other than getting a crook, is getting the right items alongside it. And there are a few items that can carry you to victory. The one I used in this particular example, I mean, I had 2, and normally you will have multiple because these builds are typically quite fast and you don't need too much survivability, but let me go over the potential items. Atl is a fantastic option and probably the second most key item after crook, I would argue, in this build. It deals a pitiful amount of damage, and it has a 10-second cooldown. However, this item's cooldown is reduced by 1% for every 2 damage it does. Once you get your crook to, I believe, gold, but definitely at diamond, Atl is reduced to the lowest possible cooldown it can have, which is 1 second. Word of advice, haste does not work on this once it's at 1 second. This will only ever trigger at a minimum of 1 second. But 300 damage every 1 second. I had a gold victory here. I went 10 wins in 11 days because I faced a bugged bumblebee build, or whatever it's called, honeybee. At the moment, the bee builds are broken. The property is supposed to trigger 1 of the busy bees every time you use a weapon, but it's currently triggering all of them. And I went against a build that had the beehive and an entire board of busy bees, and my Atl just killed me because they all triggered. That's besides the point. This build is very, very consistent at going 10-0 or 10-1, 10-2. And it's items like Atl that are doing 300 damage a second that is absolutely carrying that. Now, normally when I run a crook build, I will also run the Atl alongside things like Flail, which is a triple multicasting item. So it's not quite doing 300 damage. It's normally in the ballpark of 250 or something like that. Maybe it is 300. But you're dealing a good chunk of damage 3 times every few seconds. You also have the Jabalian Longbow, which does a very similar thing. It has 2x multicast or 3x multicast if you have more health than your opponent. We're a Pygmalien, so unless we're going against another Pygmalien, we've almost definitely got more health than our opponent. If we have the Atl, we've probably almost definitely got more health than the opponent. So just throwing in good medium weapons is an incredibly solid way to run this build. You don't need anything flashy, just the shortest cooldown, medium-sized weapon you can find. Let me quickly go over a couple of the variants of this build before we dive into the skills and then the tiering of this build. One variant you absolutely can run is a yo-yo plus another small item alongside your Atl. That just means your yo-yo is going to be triggering once every second because Atl is also triggering once every second. And crook buffs all of your weapons. It doesn't necessarily just buff your medium weapons. So if you have a Flail and an Atl triggering once every second, Flail multicast times 3 every, I believe it's 8 seconds, with a yo-yo in between, all of them are doing, let's say, 250 damage because you don't have you're missing 1 medium item in that case. You are doing an incredible amount of damage, and you also open up another small item slot. So that could be a marbles, the other side of the atlatl, to slow once a second. It could be an icicle if you just want an at the start of fight freeze trigger. There are so many different things you can run in that one small slot to just round out your build a little more. So that's one variant of it you can also run. The variant that I'm actually running this time is throwing in some survivability and scalability. So we actually went with the model ship here, which when you use an adjacent item, you shield. And I'm just using this for its trigger. So every second, basically, I'm getting a shield. That is triggering. We have sharp corners once again. Sharp corners is not necessarily a requirement for this build. But sharp corners, every time you shield, it gives your weapons damage. So if you're running the model ship variant, then going to shield skill merchants to look for sharp corners is very good. You can also look for defensive stance, which is every time you use a weapon, give your shield shielding. That is something I was looking for but never found. And then the reason why I'm running model ship is because I rolled the Apropos Chapeau. This thing has a horrible name. This is a Pygmalion item, but it's extremely rare. I very, very rarely see it. I think it's gold tier at its weakest. And when you shield, so whenever I shield, which is every second with model ship because of our atlatl, adjacent weapons gain damage for the fight. I believe it starts at 10 and then scales to 20. That doesn't sound like an awful lot, but 20 damage every second on atlatl is actually ramping pretty damn fast. And then the secret source to this particular build, and why I actually decided to pivot into these two items, was my rocket launcher. I went to Pearl's dig site one point during the day. In fact, no, I didn't think I got this from Pearl's. I think I got this from going to the docks and picking weapons. Regardless, I found a dually weapon, a medium item dually weapon that deals damage and burn on a multicast 3 every 6 seconds, and if your enemy has burn, it doubles its damage. So the way this normally works is, because we have no burn in this build, I would have loved like a burning atlatl or like model ship or something, just to make this double all the time. But it's fine if it isn't, because what happens is, it has burning itself, so your first of 3 attacks applies burning, and then it doubles for the next 2 attacks. So say after, 6 seconds, so Atlatl would have triggered 6 times, which means Apropos Chapeau and Sharp Corners would have both triggered 6 times, so it's got a bonus 120 damage already. Let's just even it out and say it's doing 600 damage, which is pretty fair with all the buffs and the fact that it's a weapon itself at diamond tier, so it's doing a ton of damage. So it's going to do 600 damage and 3 burning on the first hit, and then it doubles to 1,200. In fact, that's about exactly what it was doing. I think it was doing 1,198 off the top of my head. And then it's doing that again after 6 seconds. So yeah, this item is busted in this build, and that's the really fun thing I think about flail builds, is there are a lot of busted items for this build, especially from other classes. If you can get a swashbuckle or a sextant or something like that from Vanessa, a lot of Vanessa's key crit items are medium size, which means they slot very nicely into this build. An atlatl with a swashbuckle next to it is going to go absolutely ham. There is a Mac item I've seen. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Hopefully I'll try and find the tooltip. If not, I'll just explain it for you here. It's a medium Mac item. It's Mortar and Pestle, I think. It every 8 seconds charges and gives damage to your life-stealing weapons, but the item to the right of it has lifesteal. I've ran a crook build before with lifesteal, 1 second cooldown, 300 damage atlatl, which means I kind of have infinite sustain at that point. And then my other favorite thing to run in this build is a knife set from Jules. You can get this from Jules. There are a couple of NPCs that have knife set as well. Knife set, every time you attack with a weapon, it also does damage. And it is a weapon, so it gets the buff from crook. So you run like atlatl, flail, knife set, crook, +1 weapon. Jabalian longbow if you want even more multicasting. And then every time you're dealing damage, knife set is basically just doubling it. It's like having crit on every single item on your board. It's fantastic. Now, quickly looking at our skills, this is another Pygmalion build, or at least another one of these sort of meta builds at the moment, that you don't really need any skills in particular. I started this game out with Arms Dealer, which is a fantastic day 1 pickup. When you buy or sell a weapon, gain plus 30 max health. That's basically the only max health scaling I did the entire game. I got a couple of level up health upgrades, but I didn't go to too many chocolate bars. I didn't have a lemonade stand. Like this nearly 10,000 maximum health is mostly just from me having this day one buying and selling. So for your skills, have something that can scale your health if you can. You really do not need to worry about scaling your damage with your skills. Damage is not something you need to care about. I focused mostly on shielding because I was doing this model ship variant, which if you're doing model ship variant, go to Fortis, the skill merchant for shields, get a few of those, or at least get the sharp corners and get a shielding skill for it if you really want. It can help survive some quick bursty builds. But focus on survivability and focus on initiative, so speed of your build. So I have bold under pressure here, which the first time I fought under half health, hastes all my items. There are a bunch of things you can pick up like this that just round out the build. And honestly, once you have your high level crook, you don't really need to spend money on much else. So you can just afford to go to skill merchants regularly and upgrade your skills. Speaking of which, a little quick tip before we go into the tier lists. Crook is vital for this build. You cannot play this build. I mean, you can play this build without crook, but for the first few days, but you need to hit a crook by like day 5 or 6. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. In this particular run, I actually didn't, and I was running a completely different build where I had a Beast of Burden, which I still had by the end of this run, by the way. I had a Beast of Burden in my stash doing like 3,000 damage, but this is better. Yeah, so I was running like a Beast of Burden with some tanky items, just trying to like live through the early days. And Pygmalien can often, with a lot of max health, especially from Arms Dealer, can just sort of force his way through the first few days. But I had an Atlatl that I picked up early on, and a Flail as well. And I knew that Atlatl and then Flail, I guess, as like a secondary, are two of the most important items to have in a crook build. And that is a really important tip to have playing through the Bazaar, is if you spot an item that is a key item in another build and you can afford it, grab it, stick it in your stash. That's your plan B. I had the bird as well. I had the washy bird in my stash, ready to pivot into that if I needed to as well. That's kind of like the key for just getting more consistent 10 wins. In this case, I think it was around day 5 or 6. I rolled, I think it was again in the dock working event. It was in some random event that I just rolled and got a flail. Not a flail, sorry, a crook. And I was like, fantastic, now I can turn into that build. Another key thing for the crook, this has to be your focus for weapon upgrades. Sell, once you land in the crook build, by the way, I sold my bird. I kept my Beast of Burden because it's a weapon, but I sold all of my other shielding and healing items and freeze items. I had a snow globe at the time. Sell all your other synergies if you're happy to do the crook build, because then when you level up, you're almost guaranteed to get one of the rewards being upgrade your leftmost weapon. And if you can do that on crook every time, this build skyrockets because you can get a diamond crook pretty damn fast. Don't forget, you'll also get a guaranteed upgrade an item at level 11. I think it's level 11, sometimes it's level 10. You should also be using that on crook if you can. Crook needs to be rushed to diamond tier. I don't think you need to necessarily go surfing through shops for it, but if you can find it in shops, that's also fine. Just make sure you're spending your upgrades on your crook, and make sure you're finding that crook, or you need to pivot out of this build. Okay, so here we are at our tier list. Let's give this build a ranking. As per always, we have time to kill, survivability, replicatability, and then it's late game and 10 wins in 10 days, sort of short game potential. So for time to kill, this one's going up in S tier. This relies on you having Atlatl for the time to kill to be absolutely S tier. I think if you're without Atlatl, it's probably looking at A. One thing I forgot to mention in the main one, Caltrops also, fantastic item. This can turn enemy fast firing builds into an S tier time to kill because Caltrops are a medium weapon that also gets bonus damage from crook, so you're doing like 300 damage every time the enemy uses a weapon. Fantastic item in this build. Just wanted to make sure I mentioned that before I forgot. So yeah, time to kill at S. This is mainly looking at Atlatl, Caltrops, or something like Flail. Once that triggers, will almost definitely kill the enemy, or at least put them in a position where their build is on its last legs. It's used all of its defensive cooldowns. Survivability, I'm actually going to put in I don't want to put it in NA. NA is like, it just isn't a tanking build. And that's kind of true. I'm going to put it in C. No, you know what? I'm gonna upgrade it to B. So because you can run this build defensively, like I just did with a model ship and some investment in that, because you can run this defensively and you don't need to spend much money on items, right? I had a bronze model ship. All of my upgrades I pretty much only got through level up, because I had only weapons, so I always got level up upgrades. Atlatl can also just be at bronze. It doesn't need to be any higher. Like, you just need it to have its passive and be buffed by the flail. So my Atlatl, I think, was silver. So because you can spend all of your money on skills and focus on defensive skills, speed up skills, I'm going to give this a B for survivability. It isn't a tanking build. You will not be able to go much further. But like I say, if you can get some lifesteal on your weapons, be that through Mortar and Pestle or Circle of Life or Big Ego, if you can manage to find that, it can survive. So I'm going to put it in B. Replicatability, I'm going to put in A. It's a bit of a toss-up. The reason why replicatability I'm going to put in A, though, is because you need one item. You just need crook. Once you get crook, you put any medium item in there. You can, in the early days, run crook at a relatively high tier, and then 4 passive medium items that have 0 synergy with crook, and just win with like a 200-300 damage crook, right? Until like day 6 or 7. I don't recommend that. Definitely try slotting like flail, or take out one of your medium items and slot 2 small weapons just so they get the extra buff. But yeah, because it's so flexible outside of crook, I'm going to put it in A, although remember, for the absolute S+ tier version of this build, you do want Atlatl, and you probably want something like a flail, some other multicasting thing as well. Its late game potential, I'm not going to put in NA because it's not that it doesn't exist, but in order to go late game, I mean, you don't really have scaling outside of Pygmalien scaling his maximum health, and you buying a ton of skills because you don't need items. That being said, the later it goes, the more of a chance you have to hit things like pearls, hit things like work at docks, which can give you broken items to use. So with that being said, I'm actually going to buff this to a C, because this can win late. As I said, the build that I just ran, I might have even lied. It might have even been day 12. I might have lost a very early round to, there's currently a bug as well where there's a scaling bug. It just happens. It's whatever. But point being, you can win days 12, 13, 14 with this build. It just gets a little bit spooky as other builds are getting very strong. And then, of course, our 10 wins in 10 days is absolute peak S tier. This build can come online as early as you can get it day 1. This build can absolutely destroy the first 10 days and be the quickest, fastest, easiest win you've ever gotten. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about these new types of videos down in the comments below. And for more news, guides, and builds, you know what to do.